I'm good. Don't worry
Okay.
about it. I promise you.
Good afternoon, and let me thank you for joining us this afternoon for our second philanthropic engagement series sponsored by Blackbaud. Today we will be talking about public schools of innovation. We are very excited to have with us Dr. Gerrita Postlewait, Ms. Natasha Giles, and Ms. Kyndran Hilton and you'll learn a little bit more about them in just a few minutes. But we're very excited about the platform for today. I'd like to, you can go to the next slide, Gloria. I'd like to just overview the agenda relatively quickly. We will be defining public schools of innovation. My colleague, Edie Blakesley, will be doing that and really giving you an idea for why the Coastal Community Foundation is involved in this. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time with a question and answer with our panelists. And just a few housekeeping notes. You will all remain on mute, but if you do have questions at any point during the broadcast, please feel free to put those in the question and answer box or in the chat box. We have folks monitoring who will provide those questions to me and Edie, and then we'll respond to those as we can. This event and series of events are being hosted by CCF, Coastal Community Foundation, and Waccamaw Community Foundation. And we're very happy that going into, I don't know, Rachel, several years now, it's sponsored by Blackbaud. And so with that, our partner, friend, and colleague, Rachel Hutchinson, is here on behalf of Blackbaud to say a few words. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Darren. So, I'm a past board member of the Coastal Community Foundation. The organization is near and dear to my heart. And we at Blackbaud are really pleased to sponsor this series and continue our relationship, which really began in the mid-1990s. Well, actually it began before then, but we established our fund at the Coastal Community Foundation in the 1990s under our founding CEO, Tony Bacher. And we continue to make grants to nonprofit organizations in the Tri-County area specifically, and have learned so much through that relationship. And our people have learned so much as well. It's a way we both give back. And we're very focused on education for disadvantaged youth, which is the language that Tony used in the donor agreement. But really also around equity. We're proud to be one of the founding donors to the Low Country Equity Fund. And we're really supportive of all of the great work that Darren has been and the team have been leading. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to continue our long relationship. And I really do thank you for hosting these very important conversations that we need to have in our community.
Thank you, Rachel. We appreciate you and obviously enjoy our partnership with Blackbaud. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm going to turn it over to Edie Blakesley, our Vice President for Grant Making and Community Leadership, who will provide some context for why we're here, give you an idea of CCF's role and work in education and how we arrived, frankly, at the point at which we are now. After Edie's grounding in context, then we'll quickly move on, introduce our panelists, and then we'll get into some questions and answers. So Edie, we'll turn it over to you right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you, Rachel. So what I want to do first is to make sure that we lead with our values. This is a very important spot for us to make sure we lift up the principles by which the foundation operates. So it's one of stewardship, integrity, inclusion with equity, and courage. Our board had gone through a pretty vigorous process to make sure that we clarified and identified what this would be. And these principles, these 4 principles, undergird all of the work that we do at the foundation. Next slide. So we have a lot of different folks on the call. Thank you so much for joining us from throughout our service area, but I did want to point out that we actually serve the entire coast of South Carolina. So from Horry County at the North Carolina border down to Beaufort and Jasper, which borders Georgia. This is our footprint, and as a community foundation, we generally have a place. And this is our place. While we can do a lot in other areas and we have funded there, what we care most about is our local, hyper-local area. And so we have several regions. We have 3 offices. One is up in Murrells Inlet, which actually straddles Horry and Georgetown counties. One is in North Charleston, which I think most of you are familiar with. And then, of course, we have our office in Beaufort. We are the largest community foundation in South Carolina. We're the largest grant maker. And our footprint is fairly large. And also, while there is one other community foundation that has another county that's a little bit larger, we like the area that we are in, and we focus on that primarily. The other thing I did want to point out is, you know, we work with a lot of donors and families, companies, individuals around our mission and vision, which is really about creating vibrant communities. And we do that by uniting people and investing resources. And for us, resources are financial resources, but there are other forms of resources that we really pay attention to. And so we today are here for to talk about our Public Schools of Innovation. We did write a white paper not too long ago as we have gone into the advocacy and education space. This is one of the topical areas. Next slide, please. That has been very important for the foundation. I wanted to sort of take a moment and set a little context. So as a community foundation, we have a 45-year history. We, of course, have funded, provided financial resources in the area of education since our inception. And a snapshot over the last 3 years, our competitive grant making, we've invested $1.7 million in educational efforts. We've deployed $1.9 million in scholarships to young people to improve their situation, gain education, and get a leg up. And then in donor advised funds, which is a type of fund that allows donors the maximum flexibility to make recommendations to us where that funding goes. It's been almost $9.5 million that we've invested over the last 3 years. So cumulatively, that's a pretty large financial investment in education efforts throughout our service area and beyond. Next slide. So I mentioned that one of our areas is education, and I wanted to make sure we lift up the way that we came to that conclusion. About 4 years ago, we started on a journey to really turn outward to our community and do active listening, very intentional listening. We hosted community conversations, which were small groups, usually between 10 and 15 people, that we borrowed credibility, so to speak, from people within communities, churches, community centers, community leaders who invited us into space to talk to everyday people throughout our region about what they cared about, you know, what was important to them, what they saw in their community, what were opportunities for improvement, and what did they think were the most pressing issues. And there were 5 themes. Out of those 5 themes, our board prioritized 3 of them. So education, which is why we're here today, access to opportunity, and then the third is affordable places and inclusive spaces. And for those of you who have participated in several of these education forums so far, we have touched on affordability and opportunity, and education is our topic for today. So these 3 issues undergird our work, and it forms our civic engagement agenda, which we are more than happy to share with folks if you haven't yet seen it. And it also guides our work, particularly through advocacy. So I mentioned policy and advocacy is something new for us, which we did January of 20, vote officially to move into this area officially. And so education is one of those issues in our policy agenda. Next slide. Okay, so this is the point that I turn it over to Darren, because I will say he would be too modest to say this, but he was actually the author, one of the primary authors for our white paper, and we did a whole host of research. So I'll let him talk a little bit about that, and then we'll move to our panelists.
Thank you, Edie. And let me just say to the audience here, I will first acknowledge that education in its purest form in this state is one of the most complex, one of the most controversial, and frankly, one of the most important issues that we can take on as a group of leaders collectively, wherever you sit in this space. And so we don't take this opportunity lightly. But we do, as Edie mentioned, attend to and hear the voices of the thousands now of people that we've spoken to in the low country of South Carolina, realize that for us, public schools of innovation is one of the many tools that local school districts and personnel can have at their disposal. And so for us, the white paper is really a policy model for equitable education. It's based on work that has been done around the country, most primarily in our research in Indianapolis and Baton Rouge and places like Memphis, Tennessee, and other places. And at the core of what Public Schools for Innovation does is it maximizes the flexibility for local school districts and educational leaders to educate children, ultimately taking away some of the restrictions for how they engage and how they do the work of educating children. Our white paper is available online. We will send that as a link to you so that you can read that. You should already know that, you can go to the next slide, Gloria. You should already know that there has been some, a bill pre-filed in the state of South Carolina Senate, that's Senate Bill 208, that really has taken the old schools of choice language with input from CCF and others, has turned that into schools of innovation. And at a minimum, if that bill is passed, then it's going to get us where we think we need to be. And frankly, the folks on this call will tell you they've been using a version of schools of choice for the last several years to do the work that they do. But for Coastal Community Foundation, and with respect to what we heard from local communities, with respect from what we heard from teachers and others around the community, we really believe that current language in that bill and whatever is introduced in the House could be strengthened if we did some of these things here. And I just want to point out just a few. The educators on the call may absolutely disagree with me, and we welcome that discussion in just a few minutes. But let me just point out a few. What we know is that community engagement is important, not only to the effort of educating children, but to the information that parents and other stakeholders need. And for us, active and required community engagement is important. And that should be facilitated by some third party that objectively looks at the issues. We also believe that the potential to abuse this freedom, these things, while there is in Senate 208 a requirement for 2/3 of the local school board and 2/3 of the state school board to approve it, we think that this should be focused on those schools, the comprehensive support and improvement schools that have been on that list for a period of 3 or more years, as determined by the State Board of Education, and at a minimum, schools that are low performing schools, or essentially 5% of the schools in the state that have 2/3 or more of their students that are performing 1 or more years behind grade level. We think that we need to focus in an intentional way on those schools. And then finally, it's also about people and opportunity. That we can't, we talk about the intersection of education with access to opportunity, with affordability of housing, and we think these areas are intersectional. And so for teachers, if there are teachers on the line, we respect the fact, and we have heard that teachers have some concern about this idea of privatizing and losing jobs. And so what we are advocating for is for school districts and for local people to really think about retaining at least 2/3 of teaching staff, training them on the new curriculum or whatever, but at a minimum, retaining 1/3 of that staff. And obviously it's hard to recruit teachers anyway. And so my hat off to Ms. Giles and Ms. Hilton and all the others who have been in the classroom. But this is in no way designed to take people out of jobs. And then finally, People have classified the work that we're doing on this in this public schools of innovation as a move toward charter schools. Charter schools is something that the state of South Carolina and local school districts already can do. And so for us, that's not the issue. The issue is making sure that the local school districts have all the tools they need to be successful. Private-public partnerships are one of them. And quite honestly, in the times in which we find ourselves, it's important not to leave a tool on the table. And so with that, we're going to turn to our panelists for discussion and take the next 45 minutes to really dive into how this might be applied to South Carolina schools. And we're just privileged to have, who's not on the screen, we're having some video difficulties with Dr. Gerrita Postlewait of Charleston County Schools. She's the superintendent of schools, and Dr. Postlewait is in her 6th year as Charleston County School District Superintendent. She brings with her a wealth of experience as an education practitioner and leader at the district, state, and national levels, as an executive in the private sector, and she has served as superintendent in 2 other school districts beyond CCSD. She's also served as the chair of the State Board of Education, as a member of the National Governing Board of the American Association of School Administrators, and as a consultant for several district, states, and national organizations. Dr. Postlewait, thank you for being on the call. While we can't see you, I know you are here and you will be present. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Kyndran Hilton is the principal at Meeting Street Academy in Spartanburg. So thank you for being on board upstate South Carolina. It's great to see you. Kyndran is a native of Spartanburg, South Carolina, and is a proud graduate of the Spartanburg County's District 7 schools. She attended the University of South Carolina, Columbia, and received a bachelor's degree in Spanish and education, and she earned her master's degree in teaching and instruction at Georgia State University. In 2013, Ms. Hilton joined the Meeting Street Schools family as a teacher, where she set network records with NWEA MAP assessment scores in kindergarten and 1st grade, and she was later promoted to Dean of Curriculum, where she trained and developed teachers. Thank you, Ms. Hilton, for being on this call as well. And then Natasha Giles. Ms. Giles received her Bachelor of Science in Early Childhood Education from the University of South Carolina in Columbia. Go Gamecocks. During her time at the university, she was able to attend several schools of innovation, such as Ron Clark Academy in Georgia and Jewish Cutler Day School in Columbia. Ms. Giles is in her 4th year serving at Meeting Street Schools and is a member of the Meeting Street at Burns founding team. So she got it started. She brings innovative hands-on activities into the classroom, believes in developing the social, emotional skills of every student, and focuses constantly on strengthening family and teacher relationships. She believes in setting high standards of academic excellence and achievement, and she is currently developing her leadership skills by participating in Rules Leadership Academy and leading her school's equity team. Now, why are we doing this? Why is Meeting Street Schools here in such a pronounced fashion? It's because I get the question all the time. Well, these public schools of innovation sounds good, but we don't necessarily, we're South Carolina. We're not Baton Rouge, we're not Memphis, we're not New Orleans. What does this look like in South Carolina? And I can't think of a better reflection of what a private-public partnership, what public schools of innovation can be than an example right here in our backyard, or just up 26, 3.5 hours in Spartanburg. So with that, I think we're going to expand the screen and get into our panel discussion with the time that we have left. Again, Dr. Postlewait is here. And I just want to start, ladies, by asking you the question. We've been going through a lot the last several months, last year with the pandemic. How are you feeling this afternoon? How are things going for you personally? I think you all deserve a deep breath to take that. So thank you for joining us today. Let me just contextualize this by sort of addressing some things up front. You heard our description of and policy recommendations for public schools of innovation. The pushback I've heard from legislators for what we are advocating for is that it's too restrictive, puts too many requirements on you, takes away latitude, and many of the things we prescribe already in South Carolina state statute. So why should we why should we include that with S208? Having said that, you are obviously using the current budget proviso to do your work. From your perspective, what does it mean to be a public school of innovation, and how do you come to become a believer in this model? And Ms. Giles, we'll start with you.
Well, hello. I just want to say hello and thank everyone for being here today with us. And I am definitely a believer of public schools of innovation, and I've come to be a believer from being in these schools for 4 years now with our Meeting Street team, and being able to see firsthand just how much being a public school of innovation does for our community and for our families. So to give you a little visual, all of our students that attend our school live right here in our neighborhood, in the Wayland, Dorchester neighborhood. A lot of our kids can walk to school. And that is the number one reason why I chose to be a part of the Meeting Street family. I wanted to be at a school that was going to serve the community and serve it the best way we can, in a school that is constantly getting better to serve the kids in the community. We receive majority of our funding from the district. We have district requirements that we have to do just like any other public school. It's just that we get philanthropic donors that give us a little bit extra funding that goes to things. I know you just spoke about COVID and this pandemic we're going through. For example, our kids that chose to stay at home were able to receive technology such as iPads or Chromebooks that, thankfully, due to our donor funding, we were able to provide for them, such as hotspots, so that they can still show up every day to class and participate even though they're at home. Right now, we have majority of our kids back in the classroom, and we are able to have teachers right here with us in this classroom, in this building. So I am a firm believer of public schools of innovation because I'm sitting here every day watching it work. And I'm seeing how we have teachers that show up every day ready to get better and want to know what all we can do for our students and our communities. So I'm a believer because it's something to come see and something to believe in if you ever get a chance to come and see it. So
Thank you, Ms. Giles. And Dr. Postlewait, I know you're there. Would you respond to the same question? And then if you are open to doing so, based on the policy recommendations we've done, provide any pushback or any context. We would appreciate that as well, to hear your views and perspectives as well. Why do you support public schools of innovation?
Thank you. The fact of the matter is that Meeting Street public partnership, public-private partnership was already established when I arrived in Charleston County. When I look closely at the contract with Meeting Street, I see that the Charleston County Board of Education maintains the governance of that school, and yet the school itself benefits from having a lot of latitude outside the normal bureaucratic regulations that would keep schools from engaging teacher leaders in responding to students' needs with the flexibility that they find they need on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. With respect to the second part of your question, I am supportive of the legislation the way it's proposed. I think it's a much stronger approach than our current charter school approach. It leaves the requirement to focus intentionally on the schools where children's achievement has been languishing historically for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the systemic inequities that are baked into the system. And it allows a group of community leaders and educators to work together to formulate a plan, a proposal that is their plan and proposal that belongs to them, that requires the engagement of the very people who are served by that school in determining how the school will move forward. So I will simply say that the families that are served by Meeting Street love their school and would not want us to make any changes to it whatsoever. And if a family happens to live in that neighborhood and wanted to send their child to another school, they could, but that simply rarely, if ever, happens. So those are the reasons I am supportive of the proposal as planned, and I cannot think of a way offhand to make the proposed legislative action stronger.
Thank you, Dr. Postlewait. And Ms. Hilton, I'm gonna just nuance the same question to you because Meeting Street-Spartanburg actually started as a private school, and
Yes.
in recent years have sort of transitioned over to a private-public partnership. And you've been a part of that process. And so, could you just talk about what was the thinking going into that? Obviously, you guys are supportive of the policy, but tell us what went into that and why from one to the other.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much for having me as well. So the thing about Meeting Street-Spartanburg that is really amazing. So as you know, we are a true public school. If I were a school-age student, I would be zoned for Meeting Street. My mom lives in our zone 2 here in Spartanburg. And when I originally came to Meeting Street as a kindergarten teacher, we were fully private. It was where parents could decide if they wanted their students to come here. They could live anywhere in Spartanburg County. And so we had some families that would commute for 20, 30, 40 minutes to get their students here to attend Meeting Street-Spartanburg. And over the years, we talked about the progress that our students were making, and we talked about the needs of students and families. The families that were able and willing to commute to bring their students here were families that would very likely do very well at their neighborhood schools anyway. There were not all of the families that were coming from the lowest socioeconomic status that didn't have the exposure in the home to literacy and to high-level conversations with students. And so we made the decision in 2013 to switch over and to become a public school of innovation, to partner with Spartanburg School District 7 so that we could be a neighborhood school. That was always our mission, was to show that any student, no matter where you are, our founder, Mr. Ben Navarro, always says that your zip code should not determine the quality of your education. And we wanted that to be true here in Spartanburg for our students. And so right now we have our zone just like every other public school in District 7. Our zone 1 is one of the neediest neighborhoods in the area. As I said, I grew up right here in Spartanburg, and I have 2 daughters that attend school here as well. And so this is truly a neighborhood school. It is a school that brings in the community just as much as we go out into the community. And that's what we wanted. We didn't want to be seen as a private school where we could handpick our students and handpick our families and get the highest performing students starting at 3 and 4 years old. We wanted it to be where the families who needed it the most were allowed to come to school here. And so that was kind of the premise behind the switch.
Thank you, Ms. Hilton. I do have a follow-up question for each of you that we just received online, and it's a question about, Ms. Hilton, you just mentioned it, neighborhood schools. Some people say community schools. There's a concept that obviously there's a lot that goes behind that. But the question is specific to principals and assistant principals who don't live in the communities they serve. And this is maybe more philosophical than it is anything else. Do you believe it is, or is it important not only for the students but the adults in the school to live in the communities that they're actually serving? How important is that? And obviously there are a lot of factors beyond your control as a principal or a superintendent that creates those challenges. So just really quickly, any perspective on that?
I do think that it does bring an advantage to understand some of the challenges that our students and our families are facing each and every day, for sure. I don't think that it is a necessary thing, but I do think that there are ways to learn more about what it is. So as I mentioned, every year for orientation, we host our pre-K orientation out in the community. So we go into their neighborhood. We have a lot of community partnerships where we have an office in our Zone 1 where we go and we recruit with them. We do neighborhood tours at the beginning of the year so that our teachers are familiar with the context. We do a lot of professional development, just talking about what our students live through day to day. We talk about ACE scores, the adverse childhood experiences that our students might face and what that means for us for supporting them in the classroom. So I do think that it definitely gives you a little bit of an advantage, but there are plenty of ways to get to know your families, to get to know the communities that you serve, even if you did not grow up there, even if you did not live there. But another beautiful thing, just to speak about the partnerships with our community organizations, we are actually having conversations here in Spartanburg with the housing in the area to see, is there a way to provide some housing advantages, an apartment complex, so to speak, where teachers can come and stay there and actually live in the community so that they don't have to commute from Greenville, which is about 30 minutes from here. So we are utilizing our community partners as well to figure out what are the ways for us to attract people to live where our students are so that they do have that advantage, but there are plenty of ways to also get to know what that experience is like.
Thank you, Ms. Hilton. Ms. Giles or Dr. Postlewait, would you like to weigh in? If not, I'll move to the next question.
Yes, just to back up exactly what Ms. Hilton say, we joke a lot here that we do live in the community. We're here all day, every day. You can even catch us here on the weekend. So like Ms. Hilton just said, we have a huge community relationship with our families. We know all of our families. Even with COVID, we found a way to make sure we've kept in constant community with our families. The work we do would not be possible without the relationships we have with the families in our community. Currently, our extended day program after school is actually a neighborhood program. We actually hired them, brought them into the school, and they're working throughout the school now. We have a lot of relationships and partnerships with the businesses in our community. Like Ms. Hilton just says, at Burns, we love to, in the beginning of the year, we do a neighborhood scavenger hunt, and we get all of our teachers, we get out into the neighborhood, and you have to find certain things in the neighborhood that just makes the neighborhood beautiful and unique. And it brings that sense of belonging and those roots to each and every one of our teachers. So even if you're not from this neighborhood, you got to find that passion of the neighborhood. You got to find and understand these families, our community, to be able to serve them the appropriate way. You know, you can't know who you're serving if you don't get out there and get to know who they are. So that is a huge part, I believe, of every Meeting Street school, is that we make sure we get to know the community first. We don't just, bulldoze and step on in. We make sure we listen to them. We listen to what they want for their children, what they want from us as serving them. We listen to what things are needed in the community. So I believe, just like Ms. Hilton just said, it is so important that we have those relationships with our community, and there are several ways to be able to build those relationships.
Thank you, Ms. Giles. And Dr. Postlewait, if you want to chime in, please do. If not, I want to ask you guys a question about something, Ms. Giles, you just mentioned, and that's community engagement and how that manifests itself. But Dr. Postlewait, I'll yield to you if you want to add any to that discussion.
I think it's been covered really well. Thank you.
Thank you. A small but vocal group of opponents to the whole idea of public schools of innovation cite that this is a way of privatizing schools, of taking away control, Ms. Giles, Ms. Hilton, taking away control from local communities and parents. And so what say you? What's your response to that statement as you think about your work in light of the school privatization argument?
I would personally have to say, and being very familiar, thankfully, as an MSS network, we are very much aligned and we come together a lot to have those development sessions. So I would have to say for all of MSS is that we are not privatized. Our kids that attend our school live in this neighborhood, live in this community, and I would kind of have to say opposite, that our parents have a major say in what goes on in this school. Our parents personally here know they can show up at any time and come meet with our principal, come meet with our teachers. And if there's ever something going on in the classroom or something that needs to be adjusted, our parents are very comfortable with expressing those adjustments. We believe in differentiating. So for every student, we have very different things and curriculums and things we may do with those different students. So I would have to say that our parents' voices are very much heard. We want to hear our parents' voices. We want to know what they want from us to help them and their students, because at the end of the day, these are their children. We like to say they're our little babies too, but those are their pride and joys. These are their children, and we appreciate the opportunity to be able to take them in and to be able to help them grow. And we always say it is a partnership. It is a partnership between the teachers and the parents, definitely.
Thank you, Ms. Giles. Ms. Hilton? As a principal, yeah, how does that statement hit you?
I agree completely. We have an open door policy 100% for our parents. Of course, not this year with COVID, but we do it virtually as well. But we really do encourage our families and our parents to be as involved as possible. As I mentioned earlier, we not only bring them into the school, but we also go into their neighborhoods just to build those relationships, to make sure that they know it is okay for you all to let us know what's happening with your child. We actually had a parent that I love her. Her child right now is in 3rd grade, and I tell her that she keeps me on my toes because her student is very high performing, and every year she says, okay, Ms. Hilton, MAP scores just came out. I want my one-on-one meeting with you to talk about what are the next steps with my daughter. And that's the involvement that we encourage, and we really want to try to shape the experience for each and every child. As Natasha mentioned, we do a lot of differentiation and figuring out what does this particular student need. Having 2 teachers in every classroom, especially in our younger grades, really does help us to do that. So we create pretty much individualized education plans for that child to say, if this is where they are, this is what they're ready to learn next, despite what grade level they're in. We give them exactly what it is that they're ready for. And we also do a lot of things just to build that relationship. Again, a lot of our parents did not have the best educational experience. And so we really take it very seriously to try to change what they see as public school education. And so we do things like Fantastic Phone Call Fridays, where each and every Friday, a teacher calls at least 5 families just to celebrate and build that relationship with parents. That is another opportunity for us to say, what is it that you would like to see differently? What feedback do you have for us? Is your child going through something that we need to know about? Those types of things. Having student-led conferences where the kids get to take part in their learning, and telling their families as well all of the successes that they have. So our parents are extremely involved in the process of what we teach and how we teach, and that is something that we're just super duper proud of.
Yeah, thank you for that from the Meeting Street perspective. And Dr. Postlewait, I know this has been a theme in terms of the whole idea of privatizing schools. You use it. You inherited it, as you mentioned. You've actually used it now with Brentwood and Burns. And so I wonder how you would respond to that statement. But then if you just sort of answer this next question as well, from your perspective, what options or tools does Public Schools of Innovation give you or provide for you that you don't already have? We've heard from Ms. Hilton and Ms. Giles on how it's sort of being manifested at Meeting Street schools, but what about you and your perspective on this particular policy and how it might enhance the work that you do currently?
Thank you. We certainly did hear a lot of enthusiasm and testimonials from Ms. Hilton and Ms. Giles about what this looks like, feels like, is like at the school level. So I have to say, from the governance perspective, it is unfortunate that there is so much misinformation and misunderstanding about what partnership schools can be like. They definitely are not privatized school. Our board's relationship with Meeting Street is that anytime The majority of our board wants to give a 6-month notice that they do not wish to participate in this relationship any longer. They can move back from the partnership. There's also a requirement that the children in that school outperform their counterparts in our other schools. So there are very, very rigorous kinds of accountability measures. And
Dr. Postlewait, I'm sorry for interrupting, but in the MOU, I guess it's the MOU or the contract, it stated that these students have to outperform your other schools. Is that what I heard you say?
That was built into the original agreement. Yes, that before the Board of Education of Charleston County, the Board of Trustees, which retains the governing power over these schools, would enter into a partnership to allow this particular school to have more autonomy with its community over the kinds of decisions that it makes about how many days they'll have school, the length of the school day, when they will provide after school activities, the kinds of extracurricular supports they'll provide. For example, there had to be a quid pro quo, a guarantee, a return on investment. Why would we enter into a partnership to give the community more authority? The trade-off has to be that the benefits for children are discernible and can be publicly displayed consistently. At any time that ceases to be the case, then the partnership, the terms of the partnership can change, and can change drastically, as I've described. So, it's really unfortunate that there's the misperception that this is a step toward privatization. It's actually, in our experience, a step toward a more rigid and more immediate accountability. Those who are in the community and who are in the school accept the challenge of being much more accountable in exchange for having more operating freedom or more operating latitude. And that's to get to the second part of your question, that is the big advantage. We have educators who are so determined to change the way that schools operate for their children that they've actually come to us and thought about applying for a charter school application. And then they've realized that the charter school is not so highly under the governance of the Board of Education. They don't have as much latitude to try to make the changes that they believe they should make for children. And yet, the way that the current state law is written, we are capped. We're not permitted to enter into any sort of partnership agreement beyond the one agreement we have with Meeting Street, no matter how large your district is or what your needs are. The current legislation only allows us to have this kind of relationship with one entity. So the proposed legislation would allow the expansion to other educators and communities. And that's a point I want to make. This doesn't happen because the board or some external group decides it should happen. It happens only when a neighborhood school community says, we've tried a number of things for our school, and regardless of what we have tried to do, our children are not achieving at levels comparable to their counterparts in other parts of the state or country. And so that's the immediate kind of tool that it provides is not for me as an administrator, it's for educators who can see for themselves that the bureaucratic approach to schooling causes them to organize the day, to structure subjects, to deliver instruction around a prescribed set of rules. There are rules about how teachers are evaluated, about how principals are evaluated, but none of those rules actually get at whether the extent to which children are thriving in this school. And so it allows those practitioners and community members, the parents, and primarily parents, but other active members of a community, to say, here is what we would like to try, and in exchange for trying this, we promise you we will get better results for our children, as evidenced by these data. So I went on a bit, but that's the really important distinction I wanted to try to make in this conversation.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And we've had several questions come across the chat box in relationship to the difference between a traditional public school and a public school of innovation. And I wonder, Ms. Hilton, as the principal of Meeting Street School Spartanburg, if you could just take a minute. I think we've sort of talked around it, but in definitive terms, what are the maybe 1, 2, or 3 very specific differences that you know from a public school of innovation and a traditional school? And then the second part for you, Ms. Hilton, is we had a question about your results. How are you actually doing in terms of student level results in your school? And Dr. Postlewait, please, after she's finished, please chime in on the schools that you have here in Charleston County as well.
Absolutely. So some of the main differences with us is that we have some pieces that really do help us to kind of guarantee that we are living to that promise of equity for all students by, number one, being able to start at 3 years old and build that foundation in literacy and numeracy for our students in our neighborhoods. Also, being able to have the 2 teachers in every classroom also allows us to make sure that students are getting exactly what they need each and every day. Being able to control the curriculum, and so we get to handpick what we feel like is the best of the best for our students, what is culturally relevant for them, what is rigorous enough to meet their academic needs, and we get to make shifts when needed. And so if one year we are a little bit stronger in math and reading, we get to make those decisions of what our school day looks like to determine the amount of hours that we dedicate to what our kids actually need. And then another really amazing piece is that we get to hire our own teachers. We do pay them at 105% of what they're paid in the district. And the reason that we do this is because we are looking for the best of the best in terms of educators. We're looking for the Nik'Toshis who say things like, I'm here on Saturdays, I'm here in the evenings. This work is tremendous, and it takes a lot of time and energy and effort. And so being able to hire teachers and then compensate them as well. We also have a performance-based a bonus plan that incentivizes teachers to again go above and beyond to meet the needs of our students, because it's going to take a lot in order to fill in the holes that they come in with starting at 3 years old. We also accept students in all of our other grades. And so we might get a second grader that hasn't been with us since 3 years old. And so the ranges in our classrooms are extremely wide, maybe even wider than it might be in a public school where you have a student that hasn't been with you that might be 2 years below grade level, and you've gotten your students 2 years above grade level. So the extra work that it takes in order to move those students are definitely a part of the game changer. And then the last piece that I would say is we do get to hire our teachers, but then we also get to train them. So we have about 20 extra professional development days built into our calendar, specifically to make sure teachers are prepared to receive students in the fall. There's constant ongoing coaching and feedback to make sure the teachers have the support that they need to move kids. Yeah, so those are some of the differences.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Hilton, for that. And a couple of big takeaways from there. You start at 3. Yes. Teachers are accountable for performance. Frankly, that accountability rests with the student academic performance. Is that right?
Yes.
And
yes.
And because of that, those requirements, you actually get the opportunity to pay your teachers a bit more. And then you're very responsive to where students are with the calendar. So you have that flexibility to do that. The second part of the question, and now Dr. Postlewait, turn to you. We've got about 11 minutes left, and I do want to get to one last question. And Ms. Giles, I have one specific for you in the classroom, but it was about performance. And obviously built into the current language, Dr. Postlewait, is this sort of, you called it quid pro quo, I call it accountability of these schools have to show a differentiated difference in the performance of students. So how are the public schools, excuse me, of innovation doing relative to benchmarks across the districts?
So we have Meeting Street at Brentwood and Meeting Street at Burns, and my comments are going to refer to Meeting Street at Brentwood. Meeting Street at Burns is relatively new, and many of the students who are at Burns did not start in the 3-year-old program, and I'm not as current on the comparisons. So we look at growth. And we have some of our regular public schools in Charleston County that are doing an amazing job. So I want to be really clear at the outset to talk about the heroic efforts of teachers across schools. When we compare the growth of the students at Meeting Street at Brentwood with the growth of the schools in the same neighborhood area, we see that on average, Meeting Street at Brentwood achieves at least a year and a half of growth on average with their students for every year, academically, for every year that their students are with them. That is not the case in the schools that those children would otherwise be attending for the most part. We haven't been able to organize our resources and our focus in the same ways that have been described on this call, so that our goal is for all of our children to grow at least a year, and we're not meeting that goal with all of our kids. Obviously, if you start behind the mark of where many children, other children are starting, you're going to have to make up more time, or you're going to lag behind all your life. So it's the growth measure that we look at, and Meeting Street at Brentwood consistently grows their students more, greater distance academically than 1 year per year, and most often and they grow a year and a half per year. So that's the consistent measure that we look at, is growth. In absolute achievement, they've also made impressive gains. So that's the way, and we examine that every year. We meet each quarter with executives from the Meeting Street schools, and I'm in those meetings. A couple other folks are in the meetings, and those are the kinds of things we talk about, are the comparables. And we share ideas back and forth. It's just not so easy for us to implement them as it is for Meeting Street.
Yep. You know, the hour is coming, and so we've got 7 minutes left. I want to do sort of a rapid round, short, concise answers, if you will, to try to get in a few more questions. Ms. Giles, this question is for you. It relates to social emotional learning as a teacher and how that's implemented in your school and how across the board. And then as a teacher, how do you feel about the accountability metrics?
For me personally, social emotional is a huge thing at our school, and I'm sure that our Meeting Street schools across the board. We believe that you can't just build your students up academically, but you have to take the time to build them up socially and emotionally to be successful. We use a second step program curriculum, and we make sure our students are taught every single day that social emotional skills, and we have our counselor come in to push into each and every classroom to make sure they tie together whatever that social emotional lesson was for that week. So that is a major part of our curriculum. And then the accountability, personally, I am all for it. I am a high expectations teacher. I believe that to close that gap, like they were just speaking of, we always focus on tiered growth, not even typical growth, but tiered growth, because we have to continue to get our kids at least a year and a half, 2 years higher than where everyone else is, to be able to catch them up and to close that gap. So the accountability is very important. Our teachers, we constantly are getting better, professional developments. We look at data every single day, find out where our kids are and find out what we need to do to get them where they need to be by the end of the year.
Thank you. Very quickly, this is one for A couple for you, Dr. Postlewait, and if you don't have the answers, we can provide these to the audience later. But how many students are enrolled currently in public schools of innovation in Charleston? And Ms. Hilton, how many do you have in Spartanburg? And then a second question is related to just how many public schools of innovation are there in the state? So Dr. Postlewait, we'll go to you first, and then Ms. Hilton, and then I've got one final question for all three of you.
All right, to be corrected, my answer is 800 subject to, we have about 800 students subject to correction once I've checked to see what Brentwood plus Burns combined equals.
Thank you.
For us here in Spartanburg, we have right under 300.
Thank you. The pandemic has created some significant challenges to the work that you do, obviously, virtual learning, et cetera, et cetera. If in fact the Public Schools of Innovation law passes, how might this be used to do, Dr. Postlewait, what you call disaster recovery? How might you apply these sort of autonomies, if you will, to do the work that we know is taking place in addressing some of the slide that we know our most challenged students are experiencing? And we'll start with you, Ms. Giles, as the classroom teacher, Ms. Hilton, and then Dr. Postlewait will give you the last word. So Ms. Giles.
I would just say we're definitely going to see that slide, and with us being a public school of innovation, it's going to be helpful that we're able to set our own curriculum. We're able to set certain hours and times because students are going to need that extra time in school and different curriculum to help boost them up.
Thank you. Ms. Hilton.
Yes, I think that one of the key ways we'll be looking at as Ms. Giles said, how can we maximize on the day? But then what else can we provide? So is it extended day opportunities, programs for enrichment, Saturday Academy, thinking of all the different ways that we can support and fill in those holes. And then of course, like I said earlier, maximizing on those two teachers in the room to give each and every student their own individual education plan to make sure that they get what they need.
Thank you. Dr. Postlewait.
Okay, lightning round and lightning response. Four things. I think that we're gonna have to think about at least a 36-month recovery plan. It's gonna take more than 180 days a year. The innovation schools model would allow a community to think about how they might want to schedule 220 days of instruction per year for kids and how they want to further develop teachers. Secondly, it involves the communities in ways that allow us to feel as a school district that a third party is working with the community. Therefore, we know we're doing something for and with the community, not to the community. But it has to be with the community, for the community. And the neighborhood school has to say, this is something we value and we want to try something other than what has left us in the condition we're in. Thirdly, I think that the search for models that are working better can be well supported by philanthropic effort. Let's research what has worked for children just like ours in other places, and can we take some community representatives, let them go visit a couple other places, see what's worked, interrogate the model, talk to other people there about what problems they encountered or what successes they've experienced, and then come back and truly feel that they own their public schools. The gap between public institutions and the public has never been wider. The level of trust has never been lower. And yet, with all that has happened to us in 2020 and carries over into 2021, we must all be hopeful that we're willing to be open-minded, to listen to one another, and to learn from what is working for our children so that they can have an opportunity to take advantage of this this time that we have, that is unique in in providing the chance for us to rethink models that already weren't working for children and have disadvantaged them even more deeply during the last 10 months. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Postlewait, Ms. Hilton, Ms. Giles, for your candid conversation. Participants on this call, I know that you had multiple questions. I could tell because my text was lit up with questions. We couldn't get to all of them. We're going to send as a follow-up a survey, so look for that, as well as answers to some of the questions that you've asked that we weren't able to respond to during the session. I would like to thank Blackbaud again for sponsoring this important session this afternoon. And I think, Dr. Postlewait, you said it, and we know it. The times in which we live are very uncertain and disruptive. But I think in the area of education, and I think you've done this, Ms. Giles, Ms. Hilton, and Dr. Postlewait, where we can provide clarity and leadership with courage, I think we can actually make a dent and move our communities, our state, and ultimately our country forward. So thank you all for the work that you do. Thank you for being a participant on this forum this afternoon. We really appreciate you. And thank you all for chiming in. We will see you again at our next scheduled philanthropic engagement series. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gloria, are we still broadcasting?